Another disclaimer in the beginning. Also in this part of the chapter I had to cut some things out due to their explicit nature. Again, they will be in the version on AO3 and Spotify. And now, have fun with the chapter. Azoth by Zeitgeistic. Chapter 11, Part 2, Multiplication. At breakfast, a letter arrived from Terry, courtesy of an exhausted Yucatan Amazon. It said nothing of importance, except to relay Boots' extreme happiness with his job, his progress with Spanish, and his life in general. Harry passed it to Hermione so she could deal with it. It might have got late last night, but Terry Boot was still entirely too much for decent folk to deal with so early in the morning. Hermione's Daily Prophet landed next, and Harry was briefly interested by the headline, "Delayed World Cup to be held this summer," which was nice news, although Harry doubted Snape would let him out of his sight for long enough to attend. And frankly, he'd had enough of camping for a while. Draco would probably be interested, though, Harry suspected upon reading on. The English national team had made it to the playoffs last year, before the war interrupted everything, and Draco's favourite chaser, Hermes Kilgore, was on that team. "You and Bulstrode have any luck yet?" he asked her as he poured himself a cup of black coffee and pretended to exude an aura of nothing has changed and I haven't slept with Malfoy. Hermione looked exhausted and Bulstrode not much better. She was glaring down at her eggs, even as Hermione passed her a fresh coffee. They had both been running themselves ragged working on their apprenticeship, their inter-subject project that would come due in 4 weeks, and this new side project of fixing the Wilkins Grangers. "Yes," she said, covering a yawn. "I wrote back and they've agreed to let me try my hocus-pocus on them one more time. So we're board keying over in a couple of weeks. I just want to be absolutely sure we can do it this time." "Good," he said then. "Heard from Ron much?" "Honestly, Harry," she said, "why don't you just write him yourself?" Harry shrugged. "Feels weird." She eyed him narrowly. "He's going to be devastated when he finds out Malfoy's your new Ron, you know." "Malfoy is definitely not my new Ron." Harry was firm on this. "Whatever you say, Harry," she said. At the beginning of December, Hermione and Millicent left for Australia. Peep and Crookshanks were left behind in Draco's and Harry's respective cares, which sucked since, of course, they were always in Harry's room playing some weird cat game with Severia whenever he returned from the lab. He really had no idea how everyone was getting past his wards. Severia was a squib and therefore couldn't. Harry narrowed his eyes. "Severia Potter?" he called. She trotted in, mewed inquisitively. "I know you're a squib," he said, and her green eyes narrowed, but he continued. "But have you been, somehow, disabling my wards? You do realize that Neasels are supposed to help their master protect their homes, not open them up to whomever they please, right?" She flicked her tail in annoyance and turned to leave him again. "Oh, no, you don't," he said, scooping her up. "It's bring your naughty Neasel to work day, my dear. You're coming with me, since you obviously can't be trusted not to open doors to annoying white cats and Slytherins." This seemed to bother her not at all. She curled up in his arms and promptly began purring. Harry sighed, some of his patient's notes and other things he didn't trust to leave in the classroom overnight, and set off for his lab. He stuffed her in his cauldron for better carrying, and of course she was okay with that too. He arrived at the lab to find McGonagall relaxing in a red tartan chair. His stool was missing. "Hello, Professor," he said warily. "Ah, Potter," said McGonagall. "I was looking for my apprentice, and Severus assured me he wouldn't be here, so of course this is where I came." Harry had an exasperated sigh from the painting behind the desk, and withheld a smirk. He set his cauldron on the work table carefully, so as not to jostle his knees up. "He usually comes in about now, and then I snog him for a bit while my water boils." "I shall wait," McGonagall said then. She flicked her eyes at the painting, challenging. "Of course you shall," Snape muttered. Harry scooped Severia out of his good cauldron and set her on the table. She stretched her toes out and got comfortable, watching him lazily as he got the burner going and unrolled the mosses he'd been drying for 2 weeks. Her purring drew McGonagall's attention.
Your Neasel does have a beautiful coat, Potter.
Severia purred louder.
Where did you get such a fine creature?
The pet shop in Hogsmeade, Harry said. He pulled on his dragonhide gloves, having no wish at all to paralyze one of his limbs.
Malfoy named her.
At this, there was a loud, tinny crash from the portrait. Harry smirked at his knife set, pretended to take his time choosing between the number 4 and the number 5.
Potter?
Snape snapped, righting his chair.
I told you to leave that blasted cat out of my patient's lap.
Not yours anymore, Harry said.
In fact, it's not even your lab. It's just a manky old classroom. Miguel's got your lab, or have you forgotten?
Now, Severus, McGonagall chided.
The Neasel is not doing any harm. She's perfectly docile, look. I don't need to look,
Snape said.
One cat is like any other. It will swish its tail in a burner and end up setting the entire school on fire, my portrait included. Now, see here, Severus.
McGonagall began on behalf of all cats.
Headmistress.
Harry interrupted before she could begin a defense of cats. He gave him an annoyed look.
Since you're here, there was something I wanted your opinion on, if you don't mind.
He narrowed her eyes, but did resume her seat in the tartan armchair. Tartan armchair that most certainly had once been Harry's favourite stool.
I'm always available to students, Potter. It is my job as headmistress. Of course it is,
Snape muttered.
When I took Polyjuice for my term exam, Harry said, I was able to.
He trailed off, suddenly remembering exactly how hypothetical his animagus form was in McGonagall's eyes.
Oh, bugger.
This was more than just a passing fancy and might be significant for his and Draco's inter-subject project that was just going to have to suck it up. Victor's wand at the door and set a few privacy spells around the room. McGonagall lifted an eyebrow but said nothing.
I was able to transform into my animagus form.
He paused for her to give him a disappointed look and for Snape to snarl something like,
How bloody stupid can one Potter be? Mr. Potter,
McGonagall said,
you will register your form. Oh, yeah, okay.
He scrunched his nose.
But when I transformed back from my animagus, I came back as me, not the form I'd taken on the Polyjuice. There was still 10 minutes left on the potion. Just switching to my animagus and back overrode the potion without an antidote.
McGonagall considered.
Animagus transformation can override potions and human transfigurations,
she said.
This isn't unusual.
Finally, Snape looked interested.
Isn't it, Minerva?
He said.
Properly brewed potions don't just fail, and as much as it pains me to say this, Potter's Polyjuice was perfect.
Harry smirked, pleased.
Obviously.
He was ignored.
Severus, be serious,
McGonagall said.
I know you never cared much for the art, but transfiguration changes a body at the most basic level. It isn't just the form that changes, it is also the function. When a witch or a wizard has an animagus form, he or she is that form. Even when human, they are still their animal. It never leaves them. One transformed once, they are always two. Potions does this as well, Minerva.
Oh, she smiled.
It seems that both of our chosen fields are robust ones then, Severus. Don't patronize me, woman, he said. That isn't the only factor. We both know that charms is trivial magic.
Here McGonagall snorted and tried to cover it with a cough.
And yet, Polyjuice doesn't override glamours. There's something more at work here. Pish, McGonagall said. You're thinking about it the wrong way, Severus. The animagus form is the wizard, always. The genetic makeup of an animagus animal is embedded in the wizard right next to his own. When he transforms, he doesn't keep to his original formation. It all shifts down to the very last gene. When he transforms back to human, it shifts back. One set turns on, another turns off. Polyjuice doesn't do that. It changes the wizard enough to override his original form,
Snape persisted.
How then is he able to transform into his animagus while under the effect of the potion in the first place?
McGonagall opened her mouth to reply and let it hang there.
I see your point now. I am not certain.
The door opened at that point and Draco strode in, slinging his rucksack on the spare table and heading straight for Harry. He caught sight of their guest a bare step before his mouth would have collided with Harry's and deftly detoured to the table, as if he were going for the cat the whole time.
Headmistress,
Draco said, picked up Severia and cuddled her like a baby, as if this were a completely normal thing for him to do.
Have you met Severia? Mr. Malfoy,
Snape said.
Oh my goodness.
McGonagall chuckled, eyed Harry warmly.
You said Malfoy named your Agneser, but you didn't say he'd named her in memoriam. Potter will be in memoriam if he doesn't rename the cat,
Snape said.
I will not suffer this. I can't just go around renaming her every other day, Professor,
said Harry.
She'll get confused and then she'll have a complex. Besides, she likes her name.
Severia blinked wide green eyes at Snape's portrait and flexed her front feet lazily against Draco's chest. She made a little rumbly mewly sound and curled her fluffy tail up before falling back asleep. Snape narrowed his pearline eyes.
Potter, stop antagonizing Professor Snape, McGonagall said. Now, Malfoy, I came to see about those mirrors you transfigured for me. I'm very pleased with the stability of each of the transfigurations, but you've befuddled me with this one.
He pulled out a rough pink-grey stone, not unlike the gneiss he'd found with Harry by the forest, and floated it over to him.
I noticed that the composition is predominantly mica, and yet you chose to attempt a permanent quartz transfiguration anyway.
Yes, Draco agreed. McGonagall raised her eyebrows, obviously waiting for further explanation.
Why? Go big or go home?
Harry suggested, but was ignored.
There was a significant quartite in the composition to encourage me to try it,
Draco said. He shrugged.
I like quartz better than feldspar.
McGonagall's lips twitched.
Be that as it may, Malfoy, you must know that the transfiguration wouldn't hold.
He passed the rock back to him.
I'm surprised it lasted as long as it did, to be frank. Notice the central segment of the cross-section. It's reverting to mica again.
Draco frowned down at it.
There was no material amount of mica in that area originally. It was feldspar granite throughout the middle. Really?
Said McGonagall. She stood and came over to peer down at the specimen again.
Interesting. Well, I should expect a full report on this then, Malfoy. Let's say 3 feet by Monday. Of course,
Draco said absently, still staring at the gneiss. Harry came over to look, but had no idea whether it was much changed or not. It was still pinkish-grey on the outside, like many of the stones around the Highlands, but a specimen wedge had been cut from it, and in the centre the stone was shiny grey, like mercury. There were a few spots of clearish-looking quartz or quartzite, but Harry really wasn't well versed enough in the subject to know which. When she was gone, Harry turned to Draco.
Is it because it's a metamorphic rock?
Asked Harry.
You sat there well that day. It likes to change, doesn't it?
Draco opened his mouth to reply and then hesitated.
It's amenable to change,
he said carefully instead.
Gneiss wasn't one of the stone types McGonagall said for me to transfigure. I did it on a whim after we found that one. But yeah, it's metamorphic, and I didn't expect it to take a change at all, much less a change to quartz when it only had a very little bit to begin with. And it was unstable, Harry said, like your mom's family with the extra house elves.
Draco rolled his eyes.
Yes, it was unstable, but I know the central area was predominantly feldspar, now it's all mica.
He shook his head.
I've no idea why.
Harry bit his lip.
You've still got that gnystone you picked up when we went out to the forest? He asked. I've got loads of them,
Draco said, still staring intently at the Mika in the middle.
McGonagall's had me on mineral transfigurations for a month. It has to be that one, Harry said.
Something changed in it when that little spirit beetle crawled over it. Something that made it special. He briefly considered going and getting his own collection of them, but the spirits had not been interested in him in the forest. He was touched by death.
Why?
Asked Draco. And suddenly Harry knew. Magic sought balance, always. The spirits were attracted to his life, but Harry wasn't truly alive in the way that other people were, and he was boring to them. When the beetle crawled over the rock, it took in all the elements of death into itself, making the rock wholly life-oriented, and leaving itself still deathly. It didn't want to consume Draco's life force, it wanted to balance it with itself. Which meant that Harry was either too dead to bother with, or already balanced.
I'm sentimental, Harry said,
to which Draco rolled his eyes, but he did reach into his robe pocket and pull it out without having to conduct a search.
Now who's sentimental?
Harry thought.
I'd better be start on that essay for McGonagall, said Draco. I'll see you later.
Draco gathered his things, but Harry grabbed his wrist before he could get out the door.
Do you want to get a drink tonight, Hogsmeade?
Draco's face went carefully blank for a minute. Harry was sure he was going to fly into a romance-induced rage. But then he said, voice neutral,
Okay.
Harry did not beam at him, because that would be overstepping. Instead he said,
Well, see you then, mate.
And Draco left without another word. Harry scourgified the stone to remove any surface impurities and set it aside in his cauldron for safekeeping.
Professor, he called.
What? Snape was still in one of his bitter about having a Kneazle named after him moods. It almost made Harry wish he'd stayed with Ginny. Would have gone one better and named a child after him if he'd known it was this rewarding.
Remember last year when we studied spells to test for and remove impurities from metals? Obviously. I'm dead, not senile. Do you think they'd work on a stone?
Snape passed his lips, but this time the gesture was thoughtful. It wasn't really his turn to buy drinks, but somehow Harry ended up at the bar pulling galleons out of his pocket anyway. Draco had a way of manoeuvring him like that. He asked Rosmerta for a pair of fire whiskies, and she winked at him as she tipped some into glasses. It was a Friday, and the Three Broomsticks was as boisterous as any Sunday during professional Quidditch season, only without a giant single table. Harry wound his way through the tables, holding the glasses high to prevent spills, and towards the table Draco had secured for them with a fierce glare and an unwavering sense of superiority. The couple necking there previously had cleared out lightning quick after that. Yeah, Draco would never have felt like second best compared to the boy who lived if they'd grown up friends. Draco turned from his contemplation of the street outside the window when Harry set his whiskey in front of him.
I asked for a pink umbrella charm and a swizzle one, but Rosmerta said she's out of punsy paraphernalia. Sorry. No problem, Draco said. You can probably drink it easier without them. Winker,
Harry muttered. Draco smirked. They sipped their drinks and let the hum of people relax them into something less than awkward. Something that felt less like two blokes who'd seen each other naked and more like two blokes who were just mates. It was just that Draco's crooked smile undid him completely.
The Quidditch starts next month again. Yes, the Quidditch,
Harry said, rolling his eyes.
I don't fancy the Wasps' chances this season.
Which, of course, set Draco off on a treatise of Hermes Kilgore's ability to carry a shoddy team through to the championship. The roar of the pub faded to the background, and sometime between their second and third fire whiskey, Harry forgot completely that he was not supposed to be in love with Malfoy, and that in the event he was unable to help himself, he still wasn't supposed to show it. It was a credit to Hermes' skills on a broom that Draco didn't notice the fun smile cemented to Harry's face All the way, his fingers reached across the tiny table to run along a wet ring left by Draco's glass. When they finally set off for Hogwarts again, bursting from the broomsticks in a warm, drunken arrangement, the snow and cold hit Harry's face and stung his heated cheeks. Draco smiled at him absently, the sort of way a maid would smile at him if they were both drunk and pleased with themselves.
"Come back to mine,"
he said abruptly. Then, before Draco could read into it, he added,
"I had an idea about the gneiss." "Sure, Potter,"
Draco said right away, unsuspecting. Harry bit his lip, trying not to smile. He was so stupid for Draco. Draco pulled a bit ahead when they entered the dungeons. Maybe he felt more comfortable down here than he did up in the Transfiguration Wing, Harry reckoned. Sometimes at night, when Harry curled up in the chair of his sitting room, all done in green and ivory, with green fire torches flickering weirdly against the walls and the sound of rushing water from the lake somewhere beyond the walls, he would think of Draco and wonder if this was what it felt like to grow up in Slytherin. Sometimes he wished he'd grown up in Slytherin. Sometimes he wished his best mate had never felt like he wasn't good enough for him. His Botticelli swung open some 10 feet before Harry got to it, and Draco stood there holding it open for him, not an ounce of guilt on his face.
"How are you doing this?"
he asked, exacerbated. He peered around for Severia, wondering if she really was behind it all, but there was no sign of her.
"I didn't even hear you give a password."
Draco smirked, but said nothing. Harry huffed.
"My notes are in my room. I'll be right back."
He sorted through the stack of papers on his bedside table and finally unearthed the notes he'd taken after leaving the lab. There was something he'd overlooked all along. Something he felt ridiculously stupid for not remembering. He'd held a Philosopher's Stone in his hand once. He knew exactly what they looked like. Blood red, about the size of a snitch, smooth surface, uneven shape. They were bright, and sometimes the colouring was uneven. They looked rather a lot like quartz filled with blood. And Harry was no expert in that field, but even he was starting to see some suspicious similarities there. He snatched up the notes and turned to rejoin Draco in the sitting room, but Draco wasn't there. Harry's chest slammed against another, and the air was knocked from his lungs, although likely not from the impact, but from the heat Draco's skin against his, separated by entirely too many winter layers.
"Oh,"
said Harry stupidly. Draco narrowed his eyes.
"You cast a sobering spell on yourself before we left Rosmertas," he said. "I saw you do it."
"Yeah," Harry agreed. Draco's eyes narrowed further.
"I didn't know why at the time, so I used one too, and now I know."
Harry swallowed heavily.
"Know what?" "That you don't trust yourself around me when you're drunk," Draco said.
He shifted his stance somewhat, bringing their bodies even closer together. Harry willed himself not to die from overexposure.
"But I agreed to let things go further, as you asked. So that begs the question. What would you not trust yourself not to do when you're drunk?" "I've given you leave to do almost anything."
"Right," said Harry, for lack of anything else.
"There's really very little that's forbidden,"
Draco added.
"That's true."
Harry forced himself to step back and around Draco. He desperately needed to end this conversation before it became too much.
"I found the notes I was telling you about. I think there may have been some sort of alchemical action applied to a stone like your gneiss originally. Fire, I think, since calcination is typically agreed to be the first step in the process. So the fire burns a stone, a metamorphic rock, I think, and that causes it to change. It separates it into ash and heat-treated quartz. Maybe. I don't care, Potter,"
Draco said. And then he was in front of Harry again, bearing down on him in a way that made Harry think of broom rides through fiend fire and heated romance.
"Okay, fine. Well, I guess I can look into it myself. Harry."
Harry stopped, sucked in a startled breath. He stood there as his fist slowly clenched and tried to force the shudders from his body. The sound of his name in Draco's voice was the best sound in the world, he was sure.
"Yeah? What do you want, Harry?"
Harry scowled. These games weren't fair.
"You know what I want."
Hands came around his waist and he gasped. Draco's palms flattened against his abdomen. He felt his stomach clench in the wake of his fingers as he slid them inwards, upwards, and settled against his throat. Harry's head tipped backwards and rested against Draco's shoulder. Draco turned his face, his nose rubbing against Harry's jawline, his breath fanning out against Harry's sensitive neck.
"What are you doing?"
he asked.
"Giving you what you want,"
Draco whispered. I tried to pull away. "No, I don't want this," he said, but Draco tightened his arms and Harry remained where he was.
"I don't want a pity fuck, Draco,"
he added quietly.
"I don't want to play acting at love,"
he thought.
"You know that." "I know."
Draco agreed, and his fingers began plucking at the top buttons of Harry's shirt, sending tingles all down his torso.
"I don't give those anyway."
"Then what is this?" Harry asked lowly. Draco's fingers slipped down to the second button and tugged it free.
"I told you. It's what you want."
"I want you," Harry burst out. "I want you to want me in return, either because I turn you on or because I turn your heart on. Either sex only or sex and love. I don't want charity. Like you said, I've got a hand."
"Malfoy don't do charity."
Harry rolled his eyes. "Of course they don't." He tried to tuck himself away again, but Draco held fast and was nearly to the bottom of Harry's shirt by now anyway. He waited, defeated as Draco undid the last button, and stepped back to let the shirt fall away.
"We don't do charity, Potter."
Draco stressed as his hands came back around to pull Harry against him again. Harry shuddered, feeling of Draco's expensive shirt against his bare skin almost overwhelming.
"Not even for losers who lived."
Harry swallowed.
"Then what is this?"
Draco bent his head forward and nipped at Harry's ears.
"It's what you want, Moran,"
he whispered. How was it that Draco insulting him turned him on so much? "Which one?" he wanted to ask. "Which of the things I want?" But he didn't dare. Instead, he melted back against Draco, let his arm come up and reach backwards to tangle his fingers in Draco's soft hair. Draco moaned, arched into it like a cat, and licked a trail up Harry's neck. Harry gasped, and then Draco spun him around and kissed him harshly, like he'd been waiting to do it for ages, and it was Harry's fault they never did. Harry moaned into it, feeling himself unravel and just knowing that he'd never be able to sort himself out again. Draco sank to his knees, his fingers coming up to toy with Harry's buttonfly.
"I would ask you what you're doing,"
Harry managed through a gasp,
"but I think I have a fair idea."
Draco's expression softened. For a moment, Harry wondered if, and was horrified by, the possibility that Draco was using legilimency on him again. God, how was it that he always ruined things for himself? Things like Draco maybe going down on him. Draco's hands began a slow, delicate trail up and down Harry's thigh. "Apropos of abso-bloody-lutely nothing," he said softly,
"I like it when you make connections with potions things."
Harry swallowed.
"What?"
Draco grinned, a bit smirkily, but his eyes remained focused on his task.
"Your idea about Ignite. Now you've already run through the possibilities of using polyjuice to augment alchemy and dismissed most of them as impossible, not because the normal wizard assumes them impossible, but because you understand the theory now. You do have a talent for it, and you apply yourself."
Harry choked out a laugh to cover his building hysterical nervousness.
"And so you're going to reward me by sucking me off?"
Merlin, he was so hard it was a wonder he didn't explode like that stomach-settling solution that Snape made them brew in third. Malfoy's fingernails grazed his skin above his waistband. He may have died. He wasn't sure. Malfoy snorted.
"Please, I'm going to do this because it's all I've been able to think about, much to my own annoyance,"
he added under his breath, but Harry still heard. And even quieter,
"because I figured out that I want what you want."
Harry forced himself to smirk, gestured magnanimously, even though his heart was beating faster than a snitch's wing.
Don't let me stop you, then.
Draco didn't seem to need further invitation. Harry's trousers fell to the floor, and Draco's hands returned to his skin, running along his thighs and the backs of his knees. Places Harry hadn't even known he liked to be touched until Draco touched them. Then finally, Draco's hands lit up, teasing the skin all around, touching everywhere but there. Harry threw his head back, gasping in some vain hope that it would open his lungs and let him breathe again.
Fuck's sake, Malfoy, you twat, do it.
Fuck, Harry breathed, mesmerized by the sight. Draco grinned, finally removed his finger. Harry felt the loss of it keenly. Sank to his knees, no longer able to hold himself up without Draco's hair to hold on to. When he could finally breathe again, he took in the state of Draco's hair, a hot mess, the flush of his cheeks, very, and his lips red and swollen from heavy use. Unbidden, that day in Slughorn's returned to his mind, and reflected that he'd been absolutely right about what Draco looked like after a shag. Harry decided that he had to know precisely what Draco tasted like. He had to know the satisfaction of having Draco's cum floating around in his belly, weird as that was. He tucked him up and pushed him back until Draco fell backwards on his bed, spread out and flushed. From, in Harry's opinion, a job well done. There was no time for messing about, so he sent a strongly worded thought at Draco's clothing, and they vanished himself from his body and reappeared folded neatly in the chair by the bed. Draco's lips parted, his teeth gleamed in the candlelight as he grinned.
All that wonders magic, and you use it to undress me,
said Draco. Harry shrugged as he crawled onto the bed above him.
Nothing better to do with it.
Harry flopped down beside him. He ached to throw an arm around his chest, pull him close, and fall asleep, but he was terrified, so he didn't. He kept 4 inches between them and tried not to look like a creeper by watching Draco's face as he came down.
Good job, Potter,
Draco murmured.
Ah, thanks.
Draco's breathing deepened, and it was another 50 minutes before Harry realized he'd fallen asleep. And Harry's bad. Somehow, Harry knew that was not something Malfoys did. He should wake him up, let him go back to his own room so they could pretend like it hadn't happened. Like Draco would probably want. But Harry was selfish, really. It was a Gryffindor thing, and a Slytherin thing, and so he let Draco sleep and watched him while he did. Severia crept in sometime later, hopping up to his open pants drawer to sleep, but still, he couldn't find sleep himself. Draco was in his bed, and Harry did not know how to handle that. To be continued. Thank you for listening to this chapter of Azoth by Zeitgeistic. If you'd like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or AO3.